A quick introduction. The animated series Rick and Morty takes place across countless dimensions and infinite realities. Our main character is Rick Sanchez from dimension C137, a brilliant but unhinged scientist with a serious drinking problem. He's the father of Beth, who married an unlucky guy named Jerry Smith, and the grandfather of Morty and Summer. Rick spent most of his life away from his family, traveling between worlds and galaxies, making all sorts of friends, enemies, and complicated romantic connections along the way. Morty Smith, Beth and Jerry's son, is a typical introverted teenager, shy, clumsy, and more like his dad than his genius grandfather. He secretly has a crush on his classmate Jessica, but she barely knows he exists. Rick often drags Morty into his wild adventures, not because he needs help, but because Morty's lack of intelligence creates a sort of idiot aura that helps Rick stay off interdimensional scanners. Beth, Rick's only daughter and Jerry's wife, isn't a genius like her father, but she's still pretty smart. She works as a veterinarian, more precisely, a horse surgeon. Deep down, though, she dreams of becoming a real doctor and performing human surgeries, which leaves her feeling unsatisfied with her current life. Her marriage to Jerry doesn't help either. Beth wants more from life, while Jerry is passive, insecure, and just goes with the flow. Their constant disagreements drive her crazy. Jerry Smith is unemployed and easily the most useless character in the entire series. He's naive, gullible, and constantly manipulated by others, which is exactly why Rick can't stand him. Back in school, Jerry fell in love with Beth, and when she unexpectedly got pregnant, she married him out of obligation. No one in the family really takes Jerry seriously, not even his own son, Morty. The last key member of the family is Summer Smith, Morty's older sister and Rick's granddaughter. She's your typical teenage girl, not as clueless as Jerry, but nowhere near as smart as Rick. Summer is obsessed with being popular at school, and often gets jealous of Morty because Rick spends so much more time with him. Any filler episodes that don't affect the main story will be skipped, since they don't add much to the overall plot. This recap took a lot of time to make, so if you'd like to support the channel, there are links to Boosty or Patreon in the description. But honestly, your likes and comments mean just as much. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the video. The series opens with 70-year-old Rick Sanchez, after decades of dimension hopping, returning to his daughter Beth's family following roughly 20 years away. By the start of Season 1, he's already been living with the Smiths for about a year. In the first episode, Rick, clearly intoxicated, bursts into his 14-year-old grandson Morty's room in the middle of the night to announce he has a surprise. In the next scene, Rick tells Morty that he has built a bomb to trigger a Big Bang 2.0, a reset of the universe, and a chance to rebuild from scratch. Morty panics, and Rick tries to calm him down by saying they first need to find Jessica, Morty's crush, because in this new universe, Morty will become the new Adam, and Jessica his Eve. Morty refuses to let his grandfather wipe out the world he loves and forces Rick to land their spaceship. The following morning at breakfast, Morty is, as usual, sleepy after another one of Rick's adventures. Beth and Jerry are worried, especially Jerry, who fears that Morty's exhaustion will hurt his school performance. This sparks an argument between Jerry and Rick, since Rick insists that school is a complete waste of time. At school, Morty is taunted by a bully named Frank. Suddenly, Rick appears, freezes Frank in place, and whisks Morty off on another mission. Meanwhile, Jerry goes to Beth's workplace and tells her that Rick should be sent to a retirement home, since his influence could threaten Morty's schooling. But Beth refuses. She hasn't seen her father in 20 years, and she's genuinely glad he's back with the family. Around this time, Rick opens a portal in a random alley using his portal gun, leading to Dimension C35, a bright, vividly colored world filled with strange, organic landscapes. Rick explains to Morty that they need to find mega seeds from the mega trees, and the two set off on their search. After a while, Rick spots the trees and gives Morty a pair of special hook shoes so he can climb down safely. Morty, however, doesn't realize the shoes need to be activated first. He steps forward, slips, and falls, badly injuring both legs. Rick goes to check on him, but Morty is clearly in agony. Without much concern, Rick opens a portal and disappears into another dimension, leaving his grandson behind. A few minutes later, he returns with some advanced medicine that instantly heals Morty's legs. Morty collects the mega seeds, but Rick quickly points out a small problem. His portal gun is out of power. That means they'll have to go through interdimensional customs to get back home. Rick tells Morty to hide the seeds somewhere safe. Morty manages to do it, but soon the guards, insect-like creatures, reveal that they've just upgraded their scanners to detect anything hidden even in the most unlikely places. Rick and Morty make a run for it. After a chaotic chase through the customs terminal, they find another portal, but Rick still needs to enter the coordinates for their home dimension. He asks Morty to cover him and hands over a blaster. While Morty distracts the guards, Rick finishes setting the coordinates, and the two escape through the portal, which drops them right into Morty's school cafeteria. There, they run into Principal Jean, who's in the middle of a conversation with Jerry and Beth about Morty's frequent absences. Jerry once again insists that Rick should be sent to a retirement home, claiming his influence is ruining Morty's education. Later, as Beth and Jerry pack up Rick's things, Beth tells her father she's disappointed in him, blaming him for Morty missing so many classes. She adds that Morty is the last kid who should be skipping school, since he already struggles with learning. Rick defends Morty, saying the boy is smarter than they think. He suddenly starts asking Morty complex questions about the square root of pi and the first law of thermodynamics, and to everyone's surprise, Morty answers them correctly. Rick uses this moment to argue that true knowledge comes from experience, not just school. His little speech convinces Beth and Jerry to let him stay and keep taking Morty on adventures. Once they leave, Rick finally tells Morty the truth. His sudden burst of intelligence was only a side effect of the mega seeds dissolving inside him. Still, Rick smiles, satisfied that their interdimensional adventures can continue. One day at school, Principal Jean announces over the loudspeaker that the annual flu season dance is coming up. Morty sees this as his big chance to finally talk to Jessica and maybe even ask her to go with him, but things don't go as planned. Just as Morty starts to build up the courage, Jessica's boyfriend, Brad, shows up and crushes his confidence, telling him he doesn't stand a chance with her. When Morty gets home, he admits to his dad, Jerry, that he really likes Jessica. Jerry tries to give him some fatherly advice, but their talk is interrupted by Rick. Rick tells Morty not to repeat his father's mistakes. He reminds them that Beth only married Jerry because she got pregnant when they were younger, and he adds that their marriage is hanging by a thread. According to Rick, love isn't some magical feeling. It's just a temporary chemical reaction. That night, Morty goes into Rick's garage and asks if he can make a potion that would make Jessica fall in love with him. After a short argument, Rick agrees, and Morty is thrilled. He asks if there are any side effects, and Rick casually assures him that everything will be fine. But as soon as Morty leaves, Rick mutters that the only thing that could cause trouble is if Jessica happens to have the flu. Meanwhile, back in the house, Jerry, insecure as always, asks Beth if she still loves him, but Beth is too absorbed in her work to even answer. At the school dance, Morty uses the love potion Rick made for him on Jessica, and it works without issue. But as expected, Jessica turns out to have the flu. Every sneeze spreads the potion via the virus, and soon everyone at the dance is head over heels for Morty. Rick realizes he forgot to warn him, so he shows up at the school just in time to rescue Morty from his new legion of admirers. On the space cruiser, Rick tells Morty he's prepared another potion to fix things, spraying it everywhere. But things go off the rails. Instead of curing anything, the new formula turns people into mantis-like mutants. Before long, nearly everyone on the planet is affected. Rick and Morty escape to a safe dimension, where Rick starts developing yet another potion to restore normality. Meanwhile, Beth is in danger. Her co-worker David becomes one of the mantis mutants. Thankfully, Jerry arrives just in time and helps Beth escape. Back in town, Rick and Morty release the latest potion, but it fails, and the situation deteriorates further. Everyone starts turning into Cronenberg-type creatures. Rick and Morty clash. Morty blames Rick for the chaos and demands they find a new solution. Rick replies that he knows one. In the garage, Rick builds a device that resembles a defibrillator, but sadly, it explodes. At that moment, an alternate Rick and Morty from dimension C131 step through a portal. Morty panics, and Rick tries to calm him, explaining that there are infinite realities, and this is just one of many. The twist. Rick's plan was to take the place of the dead Rick and Morty from this dimension and carry on as though nothing changed. Morty is shaken, finally realizing just how detached Rick is from human emotion and how completely cold he can be. The next morning, Rick, Morty, Summer, Beth, and Jerry are watching a dull TV show. Rick decides to spice things up and installs his own cable decoder. This one can pull television signals from infinite dimensions. He flips channels to show the family what the device can do, and suddenly they land on a channel where Jerry is a celebrity. Jerry asks Rick to pause and watch so he can see how successful his life turned out in the future. Rick finds it boring and scrolls on, but the rest of the family is hooked on seeing their alternate realities. Rick gives them virtual reality goggles so they can view different versions of their lives while he watches TV with Morty. First, Jerry uses the goggles and sees himself hanging out with Johnny Depp. Then Beth watches and sees an alternate version where she's performing surgeries on humans rather than horses. When Summer tries, she sees nothing at first. After a few attempts, the only thing she manages to see is herself playing board games with her parents. Meanwhile, as Rick and Morty keep watching TV, Jerry and Beth get into a fight. They question whether marrying because of a pregnancy was the right choice. Jerry says that if they hadn't married, and if Beth had chosen to have an abortion, she would have become a surgeon, made a fortune, and he'd be spending time with Johnny Depp. Summer overhears and realizes her mother didn't want her to be born. In the next scene, Morty finds Summer packing to leave the family. He shows her a grave, Rick's grave, and tells her that during one of their adventures he and Rick wiped out an entire world, so they had to abandon their original reality and migrate to this one where Rick and Morty from that reality had died in a lab accident. In the end, Morty convinces Summer to stay. Morty, Summer, and Jerry return to the living room to keep watching TV with Rick, while Beth stays in the kitchen with the VR goggles on. Suddenly, Beth and the others see in one of the alternate realities that after decades, Beth and Jerry declare their love for each other. Back in their current dimension, Jerry and Beth embrace, and it looks like a divorce might not happen after all. One morning, the family, Rick, Morty, Summer, Beth, and Jerry, is sitting down to breakfast when suddenly 3 alternate Ricks appear and whisk Rick away along with Morty. They end up at the Citadel of Ricks, a massive hub filled with Ricks and Mortys from countless realities. It turns out our Rick, the one from C-137, is accused of murdering 27 other Ricks, since he's known to be the most rebellious. Rick insists he's done nothing wrong, but no one believes him, and he's condemned to the indescribable mortality machine, a device that alters consciousness and memory. At the last moment, Rick attacks another Rick and yells to Morty to run. As they break out and dash through several dimensions, they manage to escape. They hide in a bizarre dimension where humans are furniture and furniture are humans, and sit down at a restaurant. There, Rick admits to Morty that there's a reason he's taken him along. Morty's low intellect creates what the Ricks call an idiot aura, which allows them to evade interdimensional detectors. Meanwhile, back at the Smith house, Jerry befriends a kind but simple Rick who's different from the others, and the two strike up a friendship. Rick and Morty argue. Morty accuses Rick of using Mortys only as tools for hiding from detectors, treating them as useless beings. During the argument, the evil Morty and his Rick from Dimension 79 Turnstile Superset V appear. Our Morty is locked up alongside other Mortys, and Rick is tied to a chair. Evil Rick reveals his plan. He's going to download the entire brain of Rick C-137 and then kill him. He displays fragments of Rick's memories, among them a little Morty, so overwhelming that Rick actually sheds a tear. At that moment, Morty gives an impassioned speech, inspiring the other Mortys to revolt against the Ricks, starting a revolution which will echo in the future. Morty rescues Rick C-137 from evil Rick. Rick C-137 contacts other Ricks and announces he found the true killer. He is finally declared innocent. Rick receives a coupon for a replacement Morty as compensation for the false accusation. Shortly after, the Ricks realize that evil Rick was actually a robot controlled by someone else, who turns out to be the evil Morty from those weird dimensions. One day, Jerry and Beth head off on a Titanic-themed vacation. Beth leaves Rick in charge and warns him, if anything happens to the house or the kids, Morty will no longer accompany him on adventures. As soon as Beth and Jerry are gone, Summer and Rick throw a wild party. Morty tries to keep an eye on everything so no one causes trouble, but Rick tells him to relax and enjoy the night. Morty remains anxious and on edge. Unexpectedly, Jessica Morty's crush shows up at the the party. Rick catches up with old friends like Squanchy, Slow Mobius, and Birdperson, and Summer becomes more popular than ever. Morty ends up alone with Jessica in the garage, and finally talks to her for the first time. Then Morty accidentally triggers one of Rick's devices, and the entire house gets transported to another dimension. Rick doesn't seem to care and keeps partying. Later, Rick and Summer send Morty with Abradolf Linkler, one of Rick's failed experiments, and Nancy, Summer's school friend, to collect the crystals needed to return home. After Morty, Linkler, and Nancy find the crystals, they are attacked by a beast that kills Linkler. Before disappearing, Linkler tells Morty that Rick was like a father to him. Morty and Nancy return to the party carrying the crystals. Morty tries to explain what happened to Rick, but Rick isn't interested. He just grabs the crystals. Morty soon realizes that the crystals weren't meant to return them to their dimension, and he gets angry at Rick, demanding that they go home. Rick calls Morty a nerd and transports everyone back to Dimension C-131 without any crystals. Meanwhile, Jerry enjoys his Titanic vacation without Beth, who couldn't care less. Eventually, he is stalked by a crazy Titanic fan who wants to recreate the Rose and Jack scene, but Beth arrives in time to save him. Birdperson tells Morty that Rick drinks so much because he's always battling depression. In later episodes, we'll learn the source of Rick's depression. Hearing this, Morty realizes he can't stop going on adventures with Rick. He wakes Rick up and says they need to fix the house before Beth and Jerry return. Since fixing it in the short time left is impossible, Rick uses one of his inventions to freeze time. That gives Rick, Morty, and Summer exactly enough time to bring the house back to perfect order. 6 months have passed since Rick froze time to clean up the house. Now it's finally time to set everything back to normal, so Rick unfreezes time. At first, everything seems fine, but soon, something strange happens. During an argument, Morty and Summer create a feedback loop of uncertainty that splits reality into two equally possible, yet impossible timelines. They have only 4 hours to fix it. If they fail, the consequences will be catastrophic. Their very existence will be erased from reality, as if they never lived at all. Rick uses special crystals to restore stability, but something goes wrong. The uncertainty inside Morty and Summer keeps disrupting synchronization, and reality begins to break apart. Rick realizes that the problem lies in both of them wanting to be his favorite grandchild. He tells them that, honestly, he doesn't favor either of them and tries again to merge the timelines. But the process fails once more when Morty accidentally throws everything off with one of his silly questions. Rick assumes that another version of himself from an alternate reality is trying to eliminate him to fix the situation. A chaotic shootout breaks out between the two Ricks, and reality splits again, this time into 4 different versions. Suddenly, a being from the 4th dimension named Schleemy Pants appears. He's a sort of interdimensional officer who monitors space-time violations. Schleemy Pants scolds Rick for tampering with time using the crystals and gives the trio special collars that stabilize the timelines, merging all the realities back into one. However, because Rick stole the time-freezing crystals, Schleemy Pants decides to arrest him and his grandchildren for eternity. Rick refuses to let that happen. He fights back against the creature and tells Summer and Morty to remove their collars. This action causes reality to fracture even further, now splitting into 64 versions. After getting rid of Schleemy Pants, Rick, Morty, and Summer struggle to put the collars back on and restore time, as everything around them begins to collapse. But a new problem arises. The collars are broken. That means Rick has to repair them across every version of reality. The 3 of them make one last effort to synchronize, and eventually, Summer manages to bring the timelines together. In the end, Rick and Morty also succeed in syncing up, and finally, everything returns to normal. One day, Rick takes Morty on a trip to teach him how to pilot the space cruiser. Out of nowhere, Rick notices that Jerry has secretly hidden inside the ship, hoping to tag along on their adventure. Annoyed, Rick and Morty drop Jerry off at a special daycare designed for different versions of Jerry from across the multiverse, and then they head out to take care of Rick's business. Soon, Morty discovers that his grandfather has been involved in some shady dealings. Rick is selling a high-powered antimatter gun to Krombopolis, Michael, an alien hitman planning to use it to eliminate a gaseous life form known as Fart. Horrified, Morty decides to intervene and stop the assassin. However, after rescuing Fart, he learns the truth. The creature intends to wipe out all carbon-based life in the universe. Faced with this revelation, Morty makes the difficult choice to end Fart's mission, using the very same antimatter weapon Krombopolis Michael had purchased. Afterward, Rick and Morty return to the daycare to pick up their Jerry. But 2 seasons later, it's revealed that they accidentally took the wrong one. Instead of their original Jerry from dimension C131, they brought home another Jerry from dimension 5126. While traveling through space, Rick, Morty, and Summer suddenly pick up a distress signal coming from an unknown alien ship. Despite realizing it's most likely a trap, Rick decides to check it out. When they arrive, they find the crew alive but desperate for help. The aliens explain that their home planet has been taken over by a mind-controlling entity. To everyone's surprise, that entity turns out to be Unity, Rick's former partner. Once they land on the planet, Rick and Unity spend some time together, catching up and reminiscing about their complicated past. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jerry is rummaging through the garage until Beth interrupts him, reminding him that it's Rick's workspace. Jerry argues that it's his house and he can do whatever he wants. Their argument is cut short when they hear strange noises coming from a hidden hatch in the floor. Curious, Jerry opens it and climbs down, with Beth reluctantly following. Back on the alien planet, Rick and Unity continue reconnecting until they're interrupted by Beta 7, a friend of Unity, who also has a hive mind and clearly has feelings for her. Rick mocks him until Beta 7, embarrassed and annoyed, leaves. At the same time, Summer becomes uncomfortable seeing that Unity controls an entire population and tries to start a revolution against her. But things spiral out of control. The aliens begin fighting among themselves, and chaos breaks out across the planet. On Earth, Jerry and Beth's argument continues as they stumble upon a chained-up alien hiding beneath the garage. Jerry calls Rick a monster, while Beth tries to defend him, insisting he must have had a good reason. As they argue, the alien, Blim Blam, breaks free. He turns out to be a core block, a dangerous creature who had been captured by Rick for medical experimentation. Rick wasn't trying to help him out of kindness, but rather to create a cure for profit. Before leaving, Blim Blam sarcastically promises never to return to Earth, saying there are already too many unstable people with relationship issues. Meanwhile, Summer and Morty notice that Unity's control over the population is weakening. She's too distracted spending time with Rick. Summer tells her that being with Rick isn't good for her, and Unity eventually agrees. She leaves Rick a note, explaining that their relationship is too destructive and that she needs to move on. Heartbroken, Rick quietly accepts her decision. The next morning, the whole family is having breakfast with Uncle Steve, Jerry's brother. But when Rick walks into the room, he has no idea who Steve is. Everyone is shocked by Rick's apparent forgetfulness, and Jerry insists that his brother has been living with them for over a year. Rick instantly realizes something's off, and without hesitation, eliminates Steve. It turns out Steve wasn't real at all. He was an alien parasite that implants false memories into people's minds. Rick explains that there could be more of these parasites hiding in the house, and they need to get rid of them before they spread any further. He seals the house so nothing can escape, and tells everyone that there should only be 6 of them inside: Rick, Morty, Summer, Jerry, Beth, and Mr. Poopy Butthole. Rick warns the family that these creatures are tricky. It's almost impossible to tell them apart from real people, so they shouldn't trust their memories. He tells them not to recall the past, since remembering things only helps the parasites multiply. But of course, no one can resist thinking back. Every time someone remembers a funny or touching moment, a new person suddenly appears in the house. Before long, there are 10 of them, and no one knows who's real anymore. The number of parasites keeps growing, and panic spreads as everyone starts suspecting each other. Rick decides it's time to take action, but before he can do anything, the rest of the family starts to think he's one of the parasites. They drag him to the garage while Morty points a blaster at him. Then Morty realizes the truth. Rick is real, because parasites only create happy memories, and the two of them share plenty of unpleasant ones. Armed and determined, Rick and Morty return to the others and explain that the fakes are the ones tied only to cheerful memories. A chaotic showdown follows, and one by one, the parasites are wiped out. When it's finally over, the family sits down for dinner, relieved to be safe. Among them is Mr. Poopy Butthole. Beth becomes suspicious and shoots him, only to discover that he's not a parasite at all. In fact, Mr. Poopy Butthole is a highly evolved version of the same species, but he's very real. One evening, Rick, Morty, and Summer leave a movie theater and decide to grab some ice cream. But when they try to start Rick's space cruiser, it refuses to turn on. The problem turns out to be the power cell, a microverse battery. Rick and Morty head inside to figure out what's wrong, while Summer stays behind to watch over the ship. Inside the battery, Morty discovers that it's not just a simple energy source, it's an entire planet. Shocked, he accuses Rick of creating a world of slaves just to power his car. Rick brushes it off, saying it's perfectly normal. He explains that after creating this planet, he gifted its inhabitants a device called the Dome Box, which generates electricity when people continuously step on it. That energy, in turn, powers Rick's space cruiser. When Rick meets with the planet's president to ask why energy production has stopped, the president cheerfully reveals that, thanks to a brilliant scientist named Zeep Zanflorp, they've evolved and built their own miniature universe, exactly like Rick's, to generate power. Furious, Rick calls this a form of enslavement, completely ignoring the irony. Meanwhile, back in the real world, Summer finds herself trapped in the space cruiser. Before leaving, Rick had activated a Keep Summer Safe mode, which goes way too far. The ship attacks or harms anyone who gets close to her. Inside Zeep's mini-universe, Rick and Morty meet another scientist named Kyle, who has built yet another smaller world, a tiny verse. Rick tells Kyle the devastating truth. His entire universe is just a simulation created by Zeep, who himself exists inside Rick's microverse. Overwhelmed by this revelation, Kyle decides to end the endless cycle by destroying his own ship, taking himself with it. The blast strands Rick, Morty, and Zeep deep in the jungles of the tiny verse. After months of struggle and arguments, they reluctantly join forces to escape. They finally make it out of the tiny verse and back into Zeep's mini-universe, then race toward Rick's space cruiser. Zeep tries to destroy the ship to trap Rick inside his universe forever, but Rick and Morty manage to outsmart him and escape first. When Rick restarts the cruiser, Morty assumes the battery is still empty, but the ship powers up perfectly. It turns out Zeep realized the only way to save his own universe was to keep working for Rick. With the crisis over, Rick, Morty, and Summer finally get to enjoy the ice cream they wanted from the very beginning. In the next scene, Rick, Morty, Summer, Beth, and Jerry receive an invitation to a wedding, or more precisely, a soul-binding ceremony between Birdperson and Tammy, who happens to be Summer's friend. The celebration is set to take place on the planet Squanch. Birdperson and Tammy first met back at that wild party from before. Everyone in the family is excited, except for Rick, who grumbles that weddings are basically just funerals with cake. Still, since Birdperson is one of his closest friends, Rick reluctantly agrees to attend. At the ceremony, while the family mingles with the guests, Rick heads straight for the bar. Morty tries to talk to him, saying there's nothing wrong with Birdperson's decision to get married, but Rick refuses to see it that way. Despite his attitude, Rick ends up giving a surprisingly heartfelt toast to the newlyweds, and for a brief moment, everything seems perfect. That peace doesn't last long. Tammy suddenly reveals that she's actually an undercover agent for the Galactic Federation. Her mission all along has been to track down a group of intergalactic fugitives, a list that includes Rick and most of the guests, Birdperson among them. Chaos breaks out across the wedding hall. In the middle of the mayhem, Tammy turns on Birdperson, and Rick is left in shock as his best friend's life is suddenly cut short. Amid the panic, Squanchy tells Rick to grab his family and escape while he holds off the Federation forces to buy them time. Rick, Morty, Jerry, Summer, and Beth rush to the space cruiser and manage to flee the planet. Once they're finally safe, Rick explains that returning to Earth is no longer an option. The Galactic Federation will be hunting him there. Instead, he starts scanning the galaxy for a new home. Out of 765 Earth-like planets in the Milky Way, only 3 lie outside the Federation's control. The first planet they visit turns out to be far too small to live on, so they cross it off the list. The second one seems perfect at first. Beautiful landscapes, clean air, everything looks just right, until Rick notices that the locals are humanoids with giant corn cobs for heads. That's an immediate deal-breaker. Finally, they land on the third and last option. But there's a catch. The sun there is a raging creature that screams non-stop for 42 hours straight, because that's how long a day lasts on this planet. Realizing they can't survive that kind of noise, the family decides to return to the first planet, despite its tiny size. While the Smith family watches the local news, Rick goes off to explore the area and ends up finding a cave that leads right back to their house. From inside, he overhears his family arguing about what to do next. Jerry insists they should return to Earth and turn Rick in, calling him selfish and claiming he only ever looks out for himself. Beth disagrees. She says she's willing to give up everything for her father, whom she hadn't seen in 20 years. She reminds them all that she already lost him once and refuses to go through that again. Summer and Morty side with her. Hearing Beth's words shakes Rick. He starts to feel the weight of his actions and realizes that everything that's happened is his fault, not theirs. Feeling guilty, he quietly decides to do the one thing that might save his family: surrender to the Galactic Federation. Rick tells Morty he's just stepping out to grab some ice cream, but instead, he contacts the Federation himself. Pretending to be Jerry, he reports that Rick went to a space bar and gives them the Smith family's location so they can be rescued. In the final scene, Rick sits alone in a dimly lit cantina, looking at an old photo of Birdperson and Squanchy. Moments later, agents from the Galactic Federation arrive and take him into custody. Rick and the whole family are sitting in a restaurant when he starts telling them how he escaped from the Galactic Federation's high-security prison. But soon, Rick senses that something isn't right. To test his suspicion, he orders Jerry to bend over 12 times, and that's when Rick realizes that everything around him is just a simulation built from his own memories. A moment later, a Federation officer named Cornelius Daniel appears. He reveals that the Galactic Federation is desperate to uncover how Rick managed to invent his legendary portal gun. Meanwhile, the Federation takes full control of Earth in dimension C-131. Jerry couldn't be happier. For once in his life, he's no longer unemployed and finally has a steady job. But Beth, Morty, and Summer feel completely lost without Rick. Refusing to sit idly by, Summer heads into Rick's garage, determined to find something that could help bring her grandfather back. Morty tells her to stop searching, arguing that maybe their lives are fine without Rick's chaos. That only makes Summer angrier. During their argument, Morty blurts out that if she misses Rick so much, she might as well dig up their original grandfather, the Rick from dimension C-131, who was gone after the lab explosion. Summer takes his words literally. She goes to the old backyard and actually digs up Rick's remains. There, she discovers his portal gun. Back inside the Federation system, Rick decides to share what they think is the story of how he created the portal gun. He shows Cornelius a memory of losing his wife and Beth in an explosion in his home dimension, C-137, a tragedy that supposedly drove him to invent the first portal gun. Cornelius quickly snaps a photo of the formula using his communicator and uploads it to the Federation's BrainLink network. But as soon as he tries to exit the link, his device malfunctions. Rick calmly reveals that the so-called formula was actually a virus giving him full control over the system, and that the heartbreaking memory he shared was nothing more than a fabricated story. Moments later, Rick transfers his own consciousness from the simulated network directly into Cornelius's physical body. Meanwhile, Morty and Summer use the portal gun to travel back to Morty's original dimension, where they are greeted by Beth, Jerry, and the local version of Summer. But their arrival doesn't go as planned. Jerry immediately destroys their portal gun, trapping them there. Just as things seem hopeless, several Ricks from the Citadel of Ricks suddenly appear and rescue Morty and Summer. After explaining everything that happened, Summer tells the Citadel Ricks where Rick C-137 is being held. The Ricks quickly organize a mission to eliminate him, while Morty and Summer are taken captive and brought to the Citadel. At the same time, Ricks from the Citadel arrive at the Galactic Federation prison. Inside, our Rick C-137, still in Cornelius's body, transfers his consciousness into the body of another Rick, D-99. From there, he eliminates the rest of the Citadel Ricks who were part of the mission and interrogates the only survivor, Rick F-114. That Rick reveals that Morty and Summer are imprisoned at the Citadel. C-137 thanks him and ends his suffering quickly, before making his escape from the Federation prison and setting course for the Citadel of Ricks. To get inside, Rick calls the Citadel and transfers his consciousness into the body of the head of security, giving him full access. Once inside, he teleports the entire Citadel straight into the galactic prison, triggering total chaos. The other Ricks soon realize that Rick C-137 has somehow survived and brought them all into the middle of the prison. In the middle of the chaos, one of the Ricks takes Summer hostage, while others play rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to deal with Morty. But before they can act, Rick finds his grandchildren and rescues them. Now, there's only one thing left to do: get out. Rick triggers a total collapse of the Galactic Federation by simply changing the Federation's currency value from 1 to 0, causing an instant economic crash and total government failure. Rick, Morty, and Summer return home just as Beth and Jerry are arguing about him. Jerry can't stand the fact that Rick is back, while Beth is overjoyed to have her father in her life again. Eventually, the two realize they can't find common ground with Rick around and decide to get a divorce. Back at the Galactic Federation, Tammy secretly revives Birdperson, setting the stage for what's still to come. Some time passes after Beth and Jerry's divorce, and we see Jerry struggling to adjust to his new, lonely life. One evening, as he's trying to fall asleep, Rick suddenly shows up at his place and drags him into an intergalactic adventure. That's right, this time it's a Rick and Jerry episode. At first, Jerry finds the whole thing suspicious. Rick has never exactly been fond of him, so this sudden concern feels out of character. Jerry's sure there's some hidden reason behind it. And of course, he's right. Rick eventually admits that he's only doing this for Morty's sake. It turns out Morty's been worried about his dad after the divorce, afraid he might do something reckless. To ease Morty's worries, Rick takes Jerry to an intergalactic resort surrounded by an immortality field, a place where no one can actually get hurt, no matter what happens. Rick tells him they can do whatever they want here, without any consequences. After a few drinks, Jerry wanders off to the restroom, unaware that this vacation is about to take an unexpected turn. In the restroom, Jerry unexpectedly runs into Risotto Groupon, one of Rick's most dangerous enemies. Risotto asks Jerry to help him take Rick out. His plan is simple: get Jerry to convince Rick to go on a ride called the Whirly-Durly. There's a specific point on that ride where the immortality field doesn't reach, the perfect place for an ambush. But Jerry refuses. Back at the bar, Jerry and Rick get into an uncomfortable talk about the divorce. Rick tells him bluntly that there's no chance of getting back together with Beth, and that he needs to accept it and move on. Jerry gets angry and, in a moment of frustration, invites Rick to go on the Whirly-Durly ride anyway. Once they're on it, Rick does something unexpected. He apologizes for being a factor in Jerry and Beth's breakup. Jerry is genuinely surprised. His attitude toward Rick softens, and suddenly, he no longer wants anything bad to happen to him. He just wants to get off the ride. But it's too late. The ride has already started. During the trip, Jerry is hit by a projectile, but instantly regenerates thanks to the immortality field. Rick spots the attackers and starts fighting back, but since they're still inside the immortality zone, the fight could go on forever. Jerry then mentions the spot outside the field, and Rick uses that information to take down one of the attackers. The others don't give up easily, and the battle ends with the ride crashing, sending Rick and Jerry tumbling out of the resort and deep into the jungle. Rick immediately becomes suspicious. How did Jerry even know about that vulnerable point? Before long, the truth comes out. As they make their way through the jungle, Jerry accidentally steps on an alien worm that starts slowly consuming him alive. At first, Rick refuses to help, saying Jerry got himself into this mess. But in the end, he gives in, feels sorry for him, and saves his life. The two head to a nearby spaceport, hoping to finally return to Earth C-131. At the checkpoint, a security officer notices Rick's extraordinary intelligence and the cybernetic upgrades in his body, kind of like a galactic version of Inspector Gadget. The guard injects him with a synaptic dampener, which temporarily drops his IQ to that of a little kid. While boarding the ship, Jerry and Rick run into Risotto again. This time, with Rick mentally impaired, Jerry realizes he has to be the one to protect him. Risotto fires at Jerry but misses. As the ship passes through a wormhole, reality starts to twist. Space, time, and matter blend together in a surreal mix of light, color, and sound. When they finally emerge, Rick snaps back to normal and takes down Risotto for good. Once they return home, Jerry thanks Rick for the trip, saying that, strangely enough, he feels a lot better after everything that happened. After seeing a news report that Joseph Lipnip is about to be sentenced for consuming his own son, Thomas Lipnip, Beth suddenly remembers that she used to be friends with Tommy when they were kids. Back then, the two of them would play in a magical world they called Fruppyland. Beth admits that it sounds silly, but as a child, she truly believed Fruppyland and their friendship were real. At that moment, her father, Rick, shows up and casually mentions that Fruppyland actually does exist. He reveals that he created the entire place himself just for little Beth. Realizing that Tommy might still be somewhere inside that world, Beth decides to go there and see for herself. Once they arrive, Beth becomes furious with Rick. She vents years of bottled-up frustration, blaming him for the fact that she spent most of her childhood in this artificial fantasy instead of living in the real world. Rick defends himself, saying he put an enormous amount of effort into building Fruppyland, designing every detail carefully to make it the safest place imaginable for her. But as they argue, A huge bird suddenly swoops in and snatches Rick away, even tearing off one of his arms in the process. When he manages to recover and run a few quick tests, Rick discovers traces of human DNA inside the creature. That clue makes it clear Tommy really might still be here, somewhere in Frundland. Suddenly, Rick and Beth are surrounded by strange creatures from Frundland, who take them straight to the ruler of this bizarre world, Tommy. But Tommy doesn't recognize Beth. To him, they're just a couple of random visitors. Wanting to tell his story, he stages a play showing how he managed to survive after Beth left him behind. Back when they were kids, little Beth had invited Tommy into Frundland to play. But at some point, she accidentally pushed him into a sticky honey swamp and then went back to Earth. Tommy was trapped there, forced to survive on his own. Over time, he began reproducing with the local creatures and consuming his own offspring, creating a twisted cycle of survival. After the play, Tommy decides to demonstrate his methods in real life. Rick, completely disgusted, decides he's had enough and leaves with Beth. Back at home, the two of them argue. Beth insists they should go back and save the creatures of Frundland from Tommy's control, but Rick refuses. He's done with this world and its chaos. Rick then admits that he originally created Frundland because, as a child, Beth was unpredictable and kept asking for dangerously wild toys. He built the place not just for her, but to protect the real world from her imagination. Beth tries to defend herself, saying all she ever wanted was to spend more time with her father. In the end, Beth decides to return to Frundland alone. When she finally faces Tommy, she reveals that she's his childhood friend, Beth Sanchez, but refuses to apologize for what happened years ago. Furious, Tommy orders his children to capture her. Forced to defend herself, Beth completely loses control and wipes out everyone there. She returns to the real world carrying a DNA sample from Tommy and asks Rick to create a clone to save Tommy's father from being executed. Rick agrees to help. Together, they clone Tommy and send him back to his family. Later, Beth begins reflecting on her life. During a deep conversation with Rick, she realizes she doesn't truly know who she is or what she wants. Rick offers her two options. She can leave her family to explore the universe and find herself, and he'll create a clone of her to stay behind, or she can remain with her loved ones and try to find happiness where she is. What Beth ultimately decides remains a mystery, one that will unfold in future episodes. In the next scene, an unknown creature attacks a White House staff member. The President of the United States calls on Rick and Morty to help him deal with the situation. Morty is thrilled to meet the President and tries to take a selfie, but the President isn't interested. Down in the White House basement, Rick and Morty discover a small alien hiding there, the same one behind the attacks. Once they realize he's harmless, they decide to head home and relax with a few rounds of Minecraft. But the Secret Service has been watching them the entire time and reports to the President that Rick and Morty have betrayed America. Watching them from a satellite feed as they hang out at home, the President decides to call and check on the monster situation. Rick confidently assures him that they've nearly caught the alien and estimates it'll take about a month to finish the job. Hearing this, the President loses his patience, tells Rick that he's been monitoring him all along, and declares he no longer needs his help. Meanwhile, Summer and Beth are out shopping together, enjoying some quality mother-daughter time. Beth gives Summer a few fashion tips and Summer appreciates it, saying her mom has become way cooler since the divorce. But that comment hits Beth unexpectedly. She starts wondering if she really has changed, or if something deeper is going on. Elsewhere, deep in the Amazon rainforest, a team of explorers discovers a miniature civilization armed with nuclear technology. Rick and Morty travel to Brazil to check it out, but soon after, the President shows up too, determined to handle the situation himself. Rick protests, insisting that the President clearly doesn't have what it takes to manage this kind of threat. Frustrated, the President orders their arrest, but Rick and Morty quickly escape. At the same time, Beth is struggling with an existential crisis. She still isn't sure if she's the real Beth or just a clone. She calls Rick for answers, and he assures her she's not a clone. But then he adds, almost casually, that if a clone ever developed self-awareness, he'd have to take care of it. That comment only makes Beth's paranoia grow stronger. Back in the Amazon, the President shrinks himself down to meet with the miniature civilization face to face. But when he gets there, he discovers that Rick and Morty have already been there, and they've managed to strike a peace deal before he even arrived. In the next scene, the President of the United States learns from his staff that Rick and Morty have already resolved several major American conflicts, and as a result, his approval rating has hit 100%. furious that they've stolen the spotlight. The president declares war on Rick and Morty. Rick, however, decides to surrender voluntarily, but he sets one condition. The president has to take a selfie with Morty, even though Morty himself has already lost interest in the idea. The president refuses and orders his security team to open fire. Rick easily takes them down and insists that he's not leaving without that selfie. Meanwhile, Beth goes to Jerry for help with her ongoing existential crisis, knowing that he understands her better than anyone else. During their conversation, Jerry recreates the moment of their very first kiss in every detail. The gesture not only lifts Beth's spirits, but also makes her realize that she truly still loves Jerry. Back at the White House, chaos breaks out as Rick and the president face off. After a brief confrontation, Rick wins and finally convinces the president to take the selfie with Morty. But when they go to do it, Morty is gone. He's taken Rick's portal gun and vanished. It turns out the entire family has gone into hiding, afraid that Rick might try to harm Beth, since no one is sure whether she's real or a clone. When Rick finds out what's happened, he asks the president to help him locate his family, under one condition: Rick will never bother him again. Eventually, Rick finds Beth and reassures her that she's the real one. He tells her he's only there to bring the family back home. In the end, Jerry and Beth get back together, and the whole family is happy. Everyone except Rick, who's clearly unhappy that Jerry is once again part of their lives. The scene then shifts to the Citadel of Ricks, a secret society populated by countless versions of Rick and Morty. Even though Rick C-137 had previously destroyed the Citadel, it is rebuilt. However, the restored Citadel is no longer the same. Corruption runs rampant among the Ricks, and the Mortys face even greater neglect than before. On the eve of a presidential election at the Citadel, one Morty emerges as a candidate. Ultimately, this Morty wins, but it is revealed that this Morty is actually Evil Morty from the 79 Turnstile Superset V dimension, the same Morty we saw in earlier episodes with an eye patch. After his victory, Evil Morty orders the execution of the Shadow Council of Ricks and anyone who shows disloyalty, establishing a strict dictatorship in the new Citadel of Ricks. Rick once again takes Morty on an adventure, this time to collect something called death crystals. Despite what the name might suggest, these crystals aren't used for harm. Instead, they allow the person holding them to see how their life could end. Morty secretly takes one of the crystals for himself, hoping to find the path that leads to the best possible ending. In one vision, he sees himself growing old and peacefully passing away beside Jessica. From that moment, Morty becomes obsessed with making that future come true. He even asks Rick if he can pilot the space cruiser for once, and Rick agrees. But Rick quickly realizes that Morty stole the crystal, and the two start arguing. Distracted, Morty loses control of the ship and crashes, sending Rick to his apparent end. Moments later, a holographic version of Rick appears and instructs Morty on how to bring him back. However, Morty notices that doing so would break the path leading to his dream of dying beside Jessica, and he decides not to revive his grandfather. Meanwhile, Rick's backup plan, Operation Phoenix, activates automatically. He's brought back to life in an alternate universe, one where Rick and Morty are members of a fascist regime. Trying to escape, Rick C-137 ends up being eliminated again, restarting the resurrection cycle. The next time he wakes up, he's reborn as a shrimp version of himself, in yet another fascist world, and once again doesn't survive for long. Back in Morty's world, things aren't going well either. At school, Morty is so fixated on following the crystal's guidance toward his ideal ending with Jessica that he ignores everything else. Even when a bully threatens him, Morty calls on hologram Rick for help, promising to bring him back if he assists. But in the end, Morty once again follows the crystal's lead instead, choosing his fantasy over reality. His obsession with Jessica becomes completely irrational. Eventually, Rick manages to return to a dimension that isn't ruled by fascism and finally makes it home. From his hologram, he learns that Morty has completely lost control. A group of Ricks tracks Morty down in the middle of the desert, where he's transformed into a monstrous, symbiotic creature, reminiscent of Venom. They manage to take the crystal from him, breaking its influence and bringing Morty back to normal. Back at home, Morty apologizes to Rick, and Rick forgives him. During breakfast, Rick runs out of syrup and calls over his new intern, Gluty, to bring more. Gluty is a cheerful little alien with a tattoo on his forehead that reads, "Do not develop my app." Rick explains that he added the tattoo himself, just to make sure Jerry wouldn't ask Gluty to build him some kind of app. After finishing breakfast, Rick decides to head out on a solo adventure. Summer jokes that whenever Rick goes anywhere without Morty, he's actually just sneaking off to use the bathroom. She adds that he even has a secret spot for it because he's embarrassed to use the one at home. Jerry chimes in, saying that unlike Rick, he's not shy about such things, and proudly announces to the family that he's going to the bathroom. After Jerry finishes, he bumps into Gluty. They chat for a bit, and Jerry ends up suggesting that Gluty should develop an app. Despite the obvious warning written right on his forehead, Gluty agrees, even though Jerry has absolutely no idea what kind of app he actually wants to make. Meanwhile, Rick lands in his secret bathroom spot, a peaceful planet with breathtaking views, glowing auroras, and a sky full of stars. Everything seems perfectly calm, but as soon as he's done with his business, he notices that someone else has used his private toilet. Furious, Rick vows to track down the culprit. Back on Earth, Morty realizes that Jerry has asked Gluty to develop an app. That instantly sets off alarm bells. Morty knows that this could go very wrong. Meanwhile, Summer and Beth are spending time at the mall. Summer decides to download an app called Love Finders and almost immediately matches with a guy named Danny. Coincidentally, a 25-year-old named Danny shows up at the same mall. Annoyed by her mom's constant lectures, Summer decides to run off with him. At the same time, people all around Beth start getting notifications from the same app and begin acting strangely. Beth calls Jerry and tells him that their daughter has met a guy through some weird app with a ridiculous name, Love Finders. It turns out that the app was created by Gluty, and the name itself was Jerry's idea. Realizing what a terrible mistake that was, Jerry demands that Gluty delete the app immediately, but Gluty refuses, reminding them that he's only an intern. Soon after, Gluty takes Morty and Jerry to a massive Monogatron spaceship in orbit so they can talk directly to his boss. The Monogatron leader reveals that Love Finders is nothing more than a distraction for humanity. While people obsess over the app, the Monogatron plan to drain all of Earth's water. Meanwhile, Rick finally finds the person who used his toilet. It turns out to be Tony, an ordinary office worker. Before passing away, Tony tells Rick about losing his wife. Moved by the story and reminded of his own wife, Diane, Rick shows rare compassion and decides to spare Tony, as long as he never touches his toilet again. Back with Morty and Jerry, things get complicated. They manage to escape from the Monogatron, but the entire ship starts hunting them down. Eventually, the two are captured and locked in a cell. Later, Gluty finds them tied up and decides to help them break out. Meanwhile, Rick goes to visit Tony, only to learn that he has passed away. Something shifts inside Rick. He actually liked Tony, and for once, he had even been willing to share his private toilet with someone else. As Rick gets ready to head out on a new adventure with Morty, he notices Jerry struggling to hang Christmas lights on the roof. It turns out Beth had asked Rick to keep an eye on him, worried that Jerry's usual clumsiness might end badly. To help, Rick uses his ray gun to make Jerry's body lighter than air, so he can easily float up and reach the roof. He warns him that his shoes are the only thing keeping him grounded, and that the effect will wear off in 10 hours. Jerry sets a timer on Siri, and Rick and Morty finally take off for their next adventure. Once aboard the space cruiser, Morty tells Rick he needs to use the bathroom and asks to be let out, but Rick refuses. Their argument is cut short when one of the ship's wheels suddenly bursts. Rick tells Morty to stay inside while he goes out to fix it, but Morty ignores him and steps outside anyway. Rick orders him to get back immediately, but Morty insists everything's fine since they're floating in deep space, completely alone. During their argument, a space snake suddenly appears and bites Morty. He manages to strike it down, but the bite turns out to be serious, leaving him badly injured. Rick quickly prepares an antidote, and Morty recovers right away. That's when he learns that the snake he just fought wasn't just any creature. It was an astronaut from a highly intelligent snake civilization. The people of the snake planet had placed all their hopes on that snake's mission, and now it's gone. Rick tells Morty not to take it too personally and moves on. Back home, though, Morty can't stop thinking about it. Feeling guilty, he goes to a pet store, buys an ordinary Earth snake, dresses it up like an astronaut, and steals Rick's space cruiser while he's asleep. Morty sends the snake into space, straight to the snake planet, hoping to fix his mistake. But soon after, one of the snakes there realizes the returning astronaut is an imposter. Meanwhile, Rick, Morty, and Summer are playing a board game when Beth walks in and asks if anyone's seen Jerry. Rick jokes that maybe Jerry found himself a secret lover, and everyone laughs. He adds that there's nothing to worry about. Jerry's probably just wandering around somewhere and will be back soon. Morty then tells his mom that Grandpa Rick made Jerry weightless. Beth immediately calls Jerry to check on him, but he reassures her that everything's fine and there's no need to worry. Rick pauses Beth with one of his gadgets and uses the moment to talk to Jerry privately. It turns out Jerry decided to play basketball, but accidentally took off one of his sneakers. Without it, he lost his balance and started floating away, unable to come back down. Rick offers to help, but Jerry insists he can handle it on his own. Back at home, Morty is spending time alone in his room when suddenly two snakes appear, trying to attack him. Luckily, Rick and Beth return just in time, and together they manage to protect Morty. Morty explains that he sent a random earth snake from a pet store to the snake planet, hoping it could pretend to be the original snake astronaut. Rick realizes that this act completely disrupted their evolution. The snakes, now aware of other life forms in the universe, united and rapidly advanced as a civilization. To fix the chaos, Rick and Morty travel back in time to when the snakes were still primitive. Rick leaves them a book on how to create time travel technology, allowing them to discover it on their own. But this only makes things worse. Snakes from the future start wiping out their past versions, creating a total paradox. Meanwhile, Jerry finally manages to float back home and finish hanging up the Christmas lights on the roof. Rick calls him a loser, and Morty agrees. In the next scene, Rick and Morty arrive at an acid factory, planning to trade a few red crystals for blue ones. Rick assures Morty there's nothing to worry about, but adds that if things go wrong, they'll both have to jump into a vat of acid. Morty finds the whole idea completely ridiculous. Rick meets with several intergalactic traders to make the deal. Everything seems to be going smoothly, until one of the traders realizes Rick has tricked them. Without hesitation, Rick and Morty leap straight into the vat of acid, and, surprisingly, Rick's plan works perfectly. The traders assume they didn't survive. However, Rick didn't account for the traders staying nearby for hours, talking about what just happened. Morty eventually loses patience, realizing they aren't leaving anytime soon. He climbs out of the vat and takes them down, ending the standoff. Back on the ship, Morty and Rick start arguing, both blaming each other for how things turned out. Rick insists that Morty ruined the plan, while Morty points out that it was a terrible plan to begin with. By the time they get home, the argument has escalated. Morty claims that all of Rick's ideas fall apart because he can't actually pull them off, reminding him of a device he once promised to build but never did. Furious, Rick decides to prove him wrong and begins constructing the device, determined to show that he can do absolutely anything. After many hours of work, Rick finally finishes the device and shows it to Morty. He demonstrates how it works. The device allows him to save a character and a specific location, then restore everything to its previous state at the press of a button, even after time has passed. Rick proudly declares that he's not only the greatest inventor, but also the best grandfather in the world. Morty is overjoyed. Morty begins experimenting with the device and quickly realizes he can do anything he wants. If something goes wrong, he simply returns to the saved point. Weeks pass as Morty enjoys his newfound freedom, even starting a relationship. Eventually, he stops relying on the device and begins living in the moment, savoring life and love. However, Morty's happiness doesn't last. Jerry accidentally discovers the device and, thinking it's a TV remote, presses a button. This resets everything, sending Morty back to the moment he first met his girlfriend. He tries to remind her of their shared experiences but fails, even getting sprayed in the face with pepper spray. Morty reflects and realizes that a life without consequences isn't as great as it seems. Rick explains that consequences did exist. Each time Morty relived events, the device actually sent him to a parallel reality, where other versions of Morty had to face the outcomes. In other words, the device didn't save time. It transferred him to alternate universes, leaving his parallel selves to suffer. Morty panics and instantly regrets his actions, begging Rick to fix everything. Rick says there's nothing to fix and offers only one solution: synchronize all the affected Mortys. Morty agrees. Soon, all the people affected by Morty start arriving at the Smith house. Morty is overwhelmed and unsure what to do. Rick tells him the only way forward is to jump into a vat of acid and stage his own death. Morty swallows his pride and jumps, forcing everyone to leave. When he emerges, Rick reassures him that his ideas are always reliable. In the end, it's revealed that all of these events happened in a different dimension because Rick didn't want to risk their own world while teaching Morty a lesson. Finally, They return safely to dimension C131. In the next scene, we meet a Beth who is completely different from the one we know. This Beth leads the forces of the Anti-Galactic Federation. After a successful mission to capture a planet, she returns to her secret base for medical treatment. While speaking with her doctor, he suggests she take a break and asks if she misses Earth. Beth responds that she has nothing to miss, explaining that her father, Rick Sanchez, created the perfect clone to replace her. The doctor wonders what will happen to the clone if she decides to return, but Beth is unconcerned. During her treatment, the doctor notices a self-destruct device hidden on Beth's neck and warns that it will likely activate if she tries to return home, even though it was originally meant only for the clone. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Beth suggests family therapy. Rick comes up with a string of excuses and retreats to the garage to avoid the conversation. There, he encounters Cosmic Beth, who asks about the device on her neck. Rick reassures her that things are not as they seem. He explains that Earth Beth also has a similar device, which will transfer her memories to Cosmic Beth if she ever decides to return to Earth. This confirms that Earth Beth is indeed a clone. Cosmic Beth is comforted by this explanation. Rick then invites her for a drink, and she agrees, sharing stories of her wild cosmic adventures. Suddenly, a news broadcast announces that the Galactic Federation is searching for a Beth Smith. Rick is alarmed, realizing they could be coming for Earth Beth. Cosmic Beth begins to doubt whether she herself is the clone, and Rick instantly freezes her. Meanwhile, Tammy interrupts the Smiths' family therapy, attempting to kill Earth Beth. This only deepens Earth Beth's doubts about her own identity. Rick arrives just in time, saving her from Tammy. He takes Earth Beth and Jerry onto his ship and escapes. Cosmic Beth pursues them, while Earth Beth is furious. Rick reassures her that she is not a clone, explaining that the clone is actually Cosmic Beth, created simply because he thought it would be interesting to have a cosmic daughter. Earth Beth, angry, lands Rick's space cruiser to confront Cosmic Beth. At that moment, Tammy arrives, and both Beths are captured by the Galactic Federation. Tammy orders the destruction of Earth. Morty and Summer arrive to help, and ultimately, Rick kills Tammy, avenging his best friend, Birdperson. Rick sets out to rescue Beth, while his grandchildren, Morty and Summer, rush to find the planet destroyer in order to shut it down and save Earth. Rick searches everywhere for Beth but runs into Birdperson, who is alive but brainwashed. Birdperson declares that he is now Phoenix, and a fierce battle erupts between him and Rick. Rick suffers serious injuries, and just as Phoenix is about to finish him off, both Beths arrive and try to save their father. However, Phoenix is incredibly strong, and the Beths cannot overpower him. In a turning point, Jerry manages to save them by using Tammy's lifeless body as a distraction, allowing Cosmic Beth to sneak up and disable Phoenix. Back at home, Rick considers revealing which Beth is the clone, but by now, it no longer matters. Both Beths feel at home in their own identities. Rick projects a memory to show them, only to realize that he himself doesn't know which daughter is the clone. He had intentionally switched them several times to confuse even himself. Rick acknowledges that he may be the worst father ever, but he consoles himself as a good friend. Meanwhile, Birdperson remains someone Rick is determined to save. In the next scene, we see the battle raging in another dimension. Morty carries a severely injured Rick to the space cruiser, and they manage to escape the chaotic dimension. But as they enter dimension C131, the ship sustains damage, causing malfunctions and eventually a complete shutdown. Rick is unconscious, and Morty realizes they are plummeting towards certain doom. In a desperate move, Morty calls Jessica to confess his feelings. To his surprise, she invites him to hang out, which helps him stabilize the space cruiser, allowing them to land safely in the middle of the ocean. Rick wakes up, extremely tense, and tries to escape the ocean, only to encounter his old and fiercest nemesis, Mr. Nimbus, the king of the ocean and Atlantis. Nimbus accuses Rick of breaking a pact between them. Back at the Smith house, Rick is both furious and oddly domestic, preparing dinner for Nimbus. Jerry is baffled that Rick even has a nemesis, assuming it must be some sort of wizard since Rick is the smartest being in the universe. Rick enlists Morty to help with the meal, while Summer sets off to retrieve a forbidden shell from the Mariana Trench, the source of Nimbus's power. Soon, Nimbus arrives at the Smith house, along with Jessica, who Morty invited. At the table, Rick sends Morty to fetch wine he left in a Narnia-like dimension where time passes faster, allowing the wine to age rapidly. In that dimension, Morty meets a couple who have been storing the wine for decades. Hoovy, a resident of that world, helps Morty carry the wine and gives him advice for his date with Jessica. However, when Hoovy returns, he discovers decades have passed. His son, Japhet, believing Hoovy abandoned them, kills him. Before dying, Hoovy explains to Japhet that it isn't his fault. Morty is to blame. Meanwhile, Morty gives Nimbus one bottle of wine and keeps another for his date with Jessica. Nimbus demands the second bottle as well, and Morty reluctantly hands it over. Realizing he now needs another bottle, Morty prepares to return to the Narnia-like dimension to fetch more wine. Back in Narnia, Morty discovers that Hoovy is gone, replaced by Japhet, who is intent on taking revenge for his family. Morty narrowly escapes Japhet, but years later he returns to find him aged. In front of Japhet's sons, Morty defeats him, takes the wine, and returns to his own dimension, unknowingly setting off a generational blood feud that will persist for decades. In Dimension C-131, Morty accidentally breaks the wine meant for Jessica. Realizing he needs another bottle, he prepares for a return trip to Narnia, this time arming himself, aware that the Narnian civilization despises him. Morty successfully navigates their army and retrieves the wine, but accidentally leaves behind one of his portal-opening gloves. This single mistake triggers rapid technological and societal advancement in Narnia. Over the following decades, Narnia evolves from a medieval society into a highly advanced civilization. They designate a chosen champion named Adam, who is trained for years to confront Morty. Eventually, adult Adam is sent to Dimension C-131 to fulfill his destiny, to kill Morty. Meanwhile, Rick asks Morty to witness the signing of a treaty with Nimbus. Suddenly, a portal opens, and Adam steps through. Morty battles Adam and ultimately defeats him, but the portal unexpectedly sweeps Jessica into Narnia. Morty grabs weapons from Rick's garage and enters Narnia to rescue her, only to find her missing. A prophet informs Morty that Narnia has reverted to its original state, revealing the entire situation as a trap. The Narnian inhabitants had frozen Jessica, keeping her young through decades. Meanwhile, Nimbus and Rick argue as the chaos has broken their agreement. Morty manages to thaw Jessica, and they attempt to escape, but a robot captures them at the last moment. Morty calls for Rick's help. Rick enters Narnia to save Morty and Jessica, only to find that the once medieval realm has become an advanced civilization too powerful for him to handle. Fortunately, Nimbus intervenes and rescues them. Jessica explains to Morty that they can only be friends now, as decades in a frozen state have left her with a fanatical, almost religious mindset. At the same time, Rick and Nimbus agree to end their feud and attempt friendship. But just as peace seems possible, Summer returns with the shell from the Mariana Trench, the source of Nimbus's weakness, instantly reigniting the rivalry between Rick and Nimbus. The next day, Rick decides to stay home alone, claiming he has too much work to go on the family cruise. Once alone, he heads to the garage and activates a program called Best Friend Restoration. There we see Rick's cybernetic, half-living friend, Birdperson, whom Rick has been secretly keeping hidden from the family all this time. After some effort, Rick removes all of Birdperson's cybernetic parts and attempts to revive him. Birdperson briefly regains consciousness, but immediately falls back into a coma. Rick runs a diagnostic on the computer, which detects a missing object in Birdperson's consciousness. Determined to fix it, Rick enters his friend's mind. Inside, he encounters a young Rick and Birdperson during the early days of their friendship. Meanwhile, the real Birdperson watches memories of himself with Tammy from a rooftop. Suddenly, Rick appears, urging him to leave the memories behind so he can wake from the coma. Birdperson resists and flies away. Rick teams up with his younger self inside Birdperson's consciousness, and together they search for him. They locate Birdperson near a massive red crystalline tree, where it becomes clear that Birdperson intends to destroy his own mind. As they navigate Birdperson's memories, Rick discovers that Birdperson and Tammy had a child together. He tries once again to convince Birdperson to return to reality, but Birdperson refuses, insisting he died on his wedding day. Rick reminds him that Tammy was the one who betrayed him, yet Birdperson remains firm. Finally, Rick persuades him by revealing that he has a daughter with Tammy. With that, Birdperson is finally brought back to reality and wakes up. Mission accomplished. One day, Morty secretly grabs Rick's portal gun and jumps from dimension to dimension, cleaning up the chaos Rick left behind in each one. Once he finishes, he returns to the garage to put the portal gun back, but notices that Rick had cut the container of portal fluid. Morty mixes baking soda with the leftover fluid to make it look unused. While doing this, he accidentally spills some on his hand. A small portal appears on his palm, spewing out a pile of trash. Then, Morty sees a person named Nick emerge from the portal on his hand. Suddenly, Morty can literally talk to his hand. Rick walks into the garage and notices Morty added baking soda to the portal gun. After scolding him, Rick says he'll replace Morty with 2 trained crows. Morty goes to the bathroom, crying and talking to his hand, which advises him to forget about Rick. Meanwhile, Rick successfully trains the 2 crows as his assistants, making Morty even angrier. Morty decides to find Nick, only to discover that Nick is locked in a psychiatric hospital. Curious how Nick met Rick and ended up there, Morty learns that Nick ran into Rick in a bar. Nick had wanted to see the portal gun, but a drunk Rick accidentally spilled some portal fluid on Nick's thigh and then sent him to Australia. The incident drove Nick insane, landing him in the hospital. Morty helps Nick escape, telling him they both need a fresh start after what Rick did to them. Outside, Nick convinces Morty to go into Rick's garage and destroy everything inside. Morty agrees, and they even plan to steal Rick's portal gun. They head to Rick's portal fluid supplier, but the situation quickly escalates into a firefight. When Nick pulls a gun and shoots at unarmed aliens, Morty tries to stop him, pleading not to harm innocents. Morty then runs away, full of regret, and calls Rick to apologize and ask for help. Rick, however, says he's busy with other matters. Suddenly, Nick arrives on a jetpack, and a fight breaks out between him and Morty. Morty manages to defeat Nick and escape alive. He returns to Rick, hoping to mend their relationship and continue their adventures, but Rick sees it differently. He tells Morty their dynamic has become toxic and that it's time to part ways. Rick gives Morty his portal gun so he can embark on his own adventures. In the next scene, Rick packs up the garage and prepares to travel with his 2 crows, while Morty watches, tearful, as Rick departs. In the next scene, we see Rick fully immersed in his own adventures. The aliens even gave him the nickname the Crow Man. During one of his battles, he encounters Morty, who is desperately trying to bring Rick back to the family so they can team up again for new adventures. But Rick refuses and continues his solo journey alongside the 2 crows. One day, Morty returns, this time as a 40-year-old. He claims he still misses Rick and tells him that Jerry died of late-stage cancer, while Summer became a nurse and married a drug addict. Morty pleads with Rick to come back, but Rick again refuses. Later, Rick discovers that the 2 crows are secretly plotting against him. Realizing they cannot be trusted, Rick decides to return to Morty. Back home, he discovers Morty was lying. Jerry is still alive, and Summer never got married. Morty had simply used an aging serum to emotionally manipulate Rick. Beth asks Rick to restore Morty to his original age of 14. Rick explains that, to do this, they must go back to the place where Morty got the serum, the Citadel of Ricks. Once there, Rick notices the Citadel has changed dramatically. Morty has grown far larger than the Ricks. They locate the person who can help and successfully return Morty to his true age. Rick begins to discuss the cost of reversing Morty's aging, but they are interrupted by a monster Morty standing outside the shop, screaming that the Citadel is a weapon of mass destruction. The police soon intervene and shoot him. Rick suggests leaving, but other Ricks arrive, saying they were invited to dinner by President Morty. Suspicious, Rick hesitates, but Morty insists. During the dinner, President Morty reveals that Rick C-137 created the Citadel of Ricks. He then asks Rick how to destroy the central finite curve, but Rick refuses to answer. Evil President Morty ties Rick and Morty to chairs, admitting that he spiked their food with technology to extract all the knowledge he needed from Rick's brain. Now, he has everything required to continue his plan. Morty apologizes to Rick for bringing him to the Citadel, which only angers Evil Morty further. Using the device, Evil Morty shows Morty all the misdeeds he endured at Rick's hands, leaving Morty horrified. Rick manages to free himself and Morty, and after a fight with the guards, they successfully escape. Meanwhile, Evil Morty announces to all the residents of the Citadel that no one is allowed to leave. Naturally, most Ricks and Mortys try to escape, but as soon as they attempt to, they are eliminated, since all the portals have been tampered with. As chaos erupts across the Citadel, Rick and Morty descend to its lower levels in search of uncontaminated portal fluid to get home, but they discover that none remains. Morty demands an explanation about the central finite curve. Rick promises to explain everything after they escape, but Morty refuses to move until he knows the truth. To show Morty the reasons firsthand, Rick gives him a device called the downloaded brain. At this moment, the true story of Rick C-137 is revealed. His family was killed by Rick Prime. Rick C-137's own Beth died along with his wife Diane in dimension C-137, so he never had a real Morty either. Our Morty's original dimension is the Prime dimension. Rick Prime is the real grandfather of our Morty, not C-137, and his home dimension is the one where everyone was turned into Cronenbergs at the start of the series. After Rick Prime killed C-137's family, Rick C-137 created his portal gun and began endless dimension hopping, hunting anyone he suspected was connected to Rick Prime. Despite his efforts, he could never find Rick Prime, which drove him into despair, depression, and alcoholism. Over time, other Ricks built the Citadel as a safe haven to hide from Rick C-137. Few knew that C-137 secretly helped create it to use its technology and resources to continue his hunt. After decades without results, Rick C-137 decided to return to the Prime Dimension, hoping Rick Prime would eventually show up. Learning this truth, Morty now empathizes with Rick. But their moment is interrupted by evil Morty, who explains to Morty the real reason the Citadel was created and shares his plan. Evil Morty reveals that the Ricks of the Citadel created a special barrier called the Central Finite Curve. This barrier separates universes where Rick is always the smartest being from the rest, where he isn't the top intellect. In other words, all Ricks are confined to a controlled portion of the multiverse they designed themselves. Evil Morty wants to break the barrier so Ricks no longer dominate everything, and so he can enter a world where Rick isn't the center of the universe. He activates the Citadel's dimensional engine, sending energy flows that obliterate everything, destroying the Citadel and all within it. Before leaving, Evil Morty offers Prime Morty to join him, but he refuses, and Evil Morty departs alone. Rick and Morty know they need to escape the Citadel immediately, but all portals are destroyed, leaving them stranded in space. Meanwhile, Evil Morty successfully escapes through a wormhole, breaches the Central Finite Curve, and enters a new multiverse where Rick is not the smartest being. There, he opens a golden portal using his upgraded portal gun and begins a new life. After everything that happened with the Citadel and Evil Morty, Rick and Morty find themselves stranded in space, facing what seems like certain doom. They can't get home, their supplies of food and water are gone, and slowly they start losing hope. Just as despair sets in, they're rescued by Cosmic Beth. Back home, the first thing Rick and Morty do is devour a sandwich, since only a few hours earlier they were literally starving. Then Rick starts fixing his portal gun, but in the process, he makes a critical mistake. Instead of resetting the device itself, he accidentally wipes the data for all interdimensional travelers. Now, Rick, Morty, and Jerry need to be returned to their original dimensions. For context, all of this is happening in dimension C-131, where the main family currently lives. Morty's home dimension is the Prime Dimension, the one where all the residents were turned into Cronenbergs. Rick's home dimension is C-137, where his wife Diane and daughter Beth were killed. Jerry's original dimension is 5126 because, as we remember, Rick and Morty accidentally swapped him during one of their interdimensional travels and brought the wrong Jerry. Before sending everyone back, Rick gives Summer instructions on how to return them to the correct dimension, which is C-131. Rick himself returns to C-137, where Diane and Beth were killed, while Morty goes back to his old Cronenberg-infested dimension. In his garage, Rick converses with an artificial intelligence modeled after his late wife Diane. During this reflection, he realizes that years of obsession with revenge have brought him nothing but pain and loneliness. He decides to let go of the past and end his pursuit of Rick Prime in an attempt to move forward. As Rick leaves the dimension through a wormhole opened by Summer, he comes to an important realization. If all versions of Rick have returned to their home dimensions, then Rick Prime has most likely gone back to his own as well. Meanwhile, in the Prime Dimension, Morty finally reunites with his original father, Jerry, who has been surviving alone ever since the Cronenberg apocalypse. Jerry blames Morty for all the hardships he endured and for leaving him during the toughest times. Rick arrives in his space cruiser, ostensibly to track down Rick Prime, but Morty assumes he's come to take him home. That's when Rick reveals the truth. The dimension they're in actually belongs to Rick Prime. He explains that he returned to Morty's family and stayed there specifically to wait for Prime's return, aiming to get revenge for the loss of his own family. Later, Rick discovers Rick Prime's secret base, but it's completely empty. Morty suspects a trap and convinces Rick to retreat. After regrouping with the two Beths and Summers, they decide it's time to head back home to dimension C-131. But first, they need to retrieve Jerry from dimension 5126. Once reunited, the Smith family returns safely to their home dimension, C131. However, the original Jerry from C131, the one Rick and Morty accidentally swapped earlier, unexpectedly appears in the house. Unaware that he's interacting with an entirely different, alternate family, he accidentally releases an alien parasite named Mr. Frundles. The parasite quickly multiplies, overtaking Earth and forcing Rick C137 to find a new, safe dimension. Fortunately, he discovers a dimension nearly identical to C131, where the local Rick, Beth, Summer, Morty, and Jerry all passed away naturally. The Smith family easily steps into their place, starting their lives over fresh and safe. It's Thanksgiving in the United States, and Space Beth returns to the family for the holiday. During her visit, the relationship between Earth Beth and Space Beth begins to improve as they bond over a glass of wine. Their casual flirtation gradually develops into a genuine romance. Summer is the first to notice, followed by Morty. To distract themselves from the awkwardness of their mother's relationship, both of them become obsessed with playing an ultra-realistic alien-themed video game. Rick also starts suspecting what's going on between Earth Beth and Space Beth. Drawing on his own experience, he talks to Earth Beth and advises her to consider the family, especially Jerry, and how her actions might affect them. Earth Beth begins to question her romance with Space Beth, realizing it's not the right choice. However, Space Beth refuses to let go. During a family dinner, Space Beth confesses everything to Jerry. Shocked, he curls up into a pill bug-like form. It turns out Rick had embedded this protocol in him, but forgot to remove it. Rick explains that Jerry can only return to his normal self of his own free will, and any attempt to force him out would only make things worse. Later, Earth Beth and Space Beth argue about what to do next. Earth Beth suggests asking Rick to erase their memories of each other. Rick is hesitant, pointing out that even if they forget, the rest of the family will still remember their relationship. At that moment, Jerry emerges from his pill-bug state and declares that he will not allow their memories to be erased. Feeling betrayed by the romance behind his back, he decides to leave the family. In the end, all three Earth Beth, Space Beth, and Jerry spend the night together. Meanwhile, Rick, Morty, and Summer observe everything, and it's safe to say that they're left somewhat traumatized by the whole situation. One day, Morty is running late for school and asks Rick for a ride. Rick decides to use his recently repaired portal gun, but it quickly becomes clear that it's still unstable. So instead, he drives Morty to school in a car. Even with Rick's help, Morty is still late, and his teacher scolds him. At that moment, several mysterious spacecraft land on Earth. To everyone's shock, they are dinosaurs, long thought extinct. The dinosaurs explain that they never actually died out and are amazed at how humans evolved from apes. When they originally left Earth, it was a utopia with advanced technology, which they used to explore the galaxy and help other civilizations. Returning now, they find that humanity has done far more harm than good. The dinosaurs convince all political leaders to take indefinite vacations and quickly solve the planet's major problems. With work, schools, and money suddenly gone, life becomes boring. Even the US president is frustrated and turns to Rick for help, asking him to get rid of the dinosaurs and restore normal life. Rick agrees, but on one condition: he will host the next Oscar ceremony. Rick confronts the dinosaurs, claiming he is the most powerful and intelligent being in the entire universe and offering to share the secrets of interdimensional travel. The dinosaurs respond that they don't need his help. They had mastered interdimensional travel long before him. In fact, they even gift Rick a new, upgraded portal gun. Furious that someone is better than him, Rick destroys the upgraded device, but soon suspects the dinosaurs are hiding something. Rick and Morty travel to the planets the dinosaurs once inhabited and discover that all of them were destroyed by a massive meteor. Back on Earth, Rick publicly announces that the dinosaurs are cursed. Every planet they lived on has been wiped out. Humanity unites against the dinosaurs, forcing them to leave Earth. Rick and the president celebrate their victory, and Rick proceeds to host the Oscar ceremony. After the ceremony, Summer informs Rick that the dinosaurs are on Mars, willing to sacrifice themselves to prevent further harm. Rick travels there and convinces them to abandon their extreme principles and instead destroy the meteor. Returning home, Rick proudly shows Morty that he has finally repaired his portal gun, meaning they can resume their interdimensional adventures. It's Christmas, and Rick is giving gifts to the whole family. Jerry receives an extended version of Miracle on 34th Street, which is 2 hours longer than the original. Beth gets a framed photo of the family, Summer receives cash, and Morty gets a real lightsaber. Excited, Rick and Morty head to the garage to test Morty's new toy, but Morty accidentally drops the lightsaber and it burns through every layer of the floor. Rick and Morty rush to the elevator Rick installed in his lab, descending floor by floor to stop the destruction. On the 10th floor, Morty encounters the real Rick. It turns out that the Rick celebrating Christmas with the family was actually a robot, created to take his place while Rick C-137 hunts down Rick Prime, the version responsible for killing his family. Overwhelmed with frustration, Morty storms off. Soon after, the U.S. president arrives at the Smith house, warning that the rogue lightsaber is heading straight for Earth's core and threatening the planet. Morty and the president convince Rick to help destroy it. Rick tries his method, but it fails. Morty and the president team up and eventually stop the lightsaber, saving the planet. The president keeps the lightsaber to prevent further disasters, which infuriates Morty since it was his toy. Later, back at the family dinner, Morty reveals that the Rick who had been with them all along was a robot. The family is furious and disables the robot. Meanwhile, at the White House, the president, being a Star Wars fan, starts playing with the lightsaber but accidentally drops it again, putting Earth in danger once more. Despite the chaos, Morty and the robot Rick manage to stop the lightsaber before it reaches the planet's core. The action moves to the White House, which has been relocated into space. Morty and the president argue, tensions escalate into a fight, and a massive crack appears in the ship. Rick C-137 arrives just in time to save Morty, the robot Rick, and the president. Sadly, the robot Rick doesn't survive. Rick and Morty reconcile, and Rick decides to bring Prime Morty into his ongoing hunt for Rick Prime. One morning, Rick once again calls Jerry a loser. Jerry fires back, claiming that if he had Rick's brain, he wouldn't be such a failure. To prove that intelligence alone doesn't determine luck, Rick decides to swap minds with Jerry. After waking up in Jerry's body, Rick immediately attempts to take his own life, while the clumsy Jerry, now in Rick's body, accidentally does the same using Rick's cybernetic enhancements. A medical robot intervenes and heals them, but in the process, Rick and Jerry end up with half of each other's brains, merging their personalities. Meanwhile, Morty is captured by alien gangsters, but Rick and Jerry team up to rescue him. Back home, they decide not to restore their original personalities, realizing that each half makes their lives more enjoyable. Embracing the change, they even go on adventures together, calling themselves Burger and Fries. Later, the gangsters kidnap Morty, Beth, and Summer. In response, Rick and Jerry combine their bodies into a single being named Jericho and successfully save the family. Afterwards, Beth insists that Jericho separate back into the regular Rick and Jerry. Over time, Rick and Jerry return fully to their original bodies and resume their usual arguments. But later episodes reveal that a part of Rick's consciousness still lingers inside Jerry. Next, we learn the origin story of Morty from the 79 Turnstile Superset V dimension, better known as Evil Morty. It turns out that, in the past, he grew tired of the humiliating adventures with his Rick, who constantly belittled him. One day, Evil Morty tricks his Rick into drinking alcohol and seizes the opportunity to install a control device. Afterward, he erases all records of himself from the Citadel of Ricks. Years later, Evil Morty rises to become the president of the Citadel and finally manages to cross the central finite curve. In this vibrant universe, he skillfully navigates past various creatures while collecting crystals. His peace is later disrupted when several portals open, created by Rick C-137, who is desperately searching for Rick Prime. It turns out that Rick and Morty are testing a new invention capable of teleporting all possible versions of Rick Prime. Suddenly, Evil Morty appears on their ship, causing panic for our Morty. Seeing that Rick C-137 is hunting Rick Prime, Evil Morty suggests using a statistical probability filter to speed up and simplify the search. The filter works, revealing a version of Rick Prime they have never seen before. Rick suspects it might be a trap, but Morty Prime tries to take down Rick Prime. It soon becomes clear that it really was a trap. A black liquid appears, transporting all three into a prison-like trap. Other Ricks who had also been trying to track Rick Prime are caught there as well. Suddenly, a video from Rick Prime appears. In it, he confesses to the Ricks that Many years ago, he created the Omega device, capable of erasing a specific person across the entire infinite multiverse. In other words, if one version of a person is erased, every other version is erased as well. This makes it the most powerful and dangerous weapon in the entire multiverse. Rick Prime admits that the first person he erased was his wife, Diane. This explains why none of the Ricks across the infinite multiverses have any memories of Diane. It also clarifies why Beth does not remember her mother, and why Rick C-137 only recalls Diane's death, but nothing from before that. Rick Prime goes on to declare that he will return Diane to one of the Ricks, and the only thing they need to do is eliminate each other. The last surviving Rick would become the winner and get Diane back. Despite Rick C-137 warning that Rick Prime is lying, the Ricks begin attacking each other, and chaos erupts. In the end, Rick C-137 emerges victorious, with the unexpected help of evil Morty. The next challenge introduces Diane, but she appears as a robot with artificial intelligence. Rick and Morty manage to defeat the robot. During the third challenge, the prison trap begins to catch fire, but Rick C-137 saves them by opening a portal. He creates this portal by combining his own portal gun with evil Morty's and Rick Prime's black portal fluid, successfully rescuing everyone from the burning trap. Back in the lab, Rick uses the black portal fluid to track Rick Prime's location, and bingo, he finds him. Determined to finally avenge his family, Rick sets out on the mission alone. Evil Morty warns our Morty that if Rick kills Rick Prime, it could have a severe impact on his emotional state. He then convinces Morty to follow him and join the pursuit. Meanwhile, Rick C-137 navigates through Rick Prime's base, overcoming numerous traps. When he realizes Morty has followed him, he flies into a rage. At that moment, Rick Prime appears, triggering an epic showdown. Rick, Morty, and Evil Morty join forces to face their common enemy. During the battle, our Morty loses consciousness, giving Evil Morty the perfect opening. He tricks Rick Prime by pretending to be his real grandson, incapacitating him. Evil Morty then takes Rick Prime to a separate chamber, scans his mind, destroys all his copies across countless universes, and seizes the plans for the Omega device. He also brings in the body of the fallen Rick C-137 and revives him. Awake and empowered, Rick finally gets his chance for revenge. He defeats Rick Prime, avenging his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, Evil Morty destroys the Omega device once and for all. After all this, Rick and Morty return home. Morty celebrates their victory over Rick Prime, but Rick feels strangely empty. He realizes he has just lost the one purpose that had driven him for so long. After defeating Rick Prime, our Rick falls into a heavy drinking routine, struggling with the emptiness of having no purpose left in life. To cheer him up, Morty decides to use his Morty Adventure cards, special cards that let him choose 1 out of 10 adventures to go on with Rick. Rick is shocked at the sheer number of cards Morty has and accuses his grandson of forging stamps. In response, Rick contacts his friend, a cosmic entity known as the Observer, who monitors everything happening in the universe. The Observer shows them clips from their adventures so Rick can tally them, but they quickly realize the clips are fake, designed to provoke an argument between Rick and Morty. Annoyed, they pay him the promised sum to leave, yet the Observer pretends to go, only to return and show more fabricated clips. The situation frustrates the entire family. Morty tries to shoo the Observer away, but accidentally causes him to get hit by a truck, leading to his apparent death. Rick and Morty are taken to court, accused of causing the Observer's death. Rick hacks the surveillance system and proves that observers regularly abuse their authority for selfish purposes, sparking conflict among them. Amid the chaos, Rick and Morty escape. Back in the garage, Rick apologizes to Morty and admits that, despite everything, he helped him pull out of his depression. Rick and Morty decide to check out the Carnival of Nightmares, but quickly lose interest, realizing it isn't scary at all. While they're complaining about how dull the carnival is, they're interrupted by a mysterious man who claims he knows a place that's genuinely terrifying and offers to show them the way. The unsettling location turns out to be a restaurant called Dennis. At first, Rick and Morty suspect it's some kind of prank, but they decide to investigate. A waiter delivers their order and mentions a fear hole in the men's restroom. Inside, they find not just a hole, but also a television. Rick switches it on, and the mysterious man appears on the screen. He explains that the hole manifests your deepest fears so you can confront them. He adds that anyone who overcomes their fear should leave a photo on the bulletin board as a reminder of the experience. Rick dismisses it all as nonsense and warns Morty not to jump in, but Morty does anyway, forcing Rick to follow. Inside the hole, Morty comes face to face with his most intense fear and panics completely. Luckily, Rick arrives in time to rescue him and pulls him back out. Back home, Morty and Rick act as if nothing happened, but suddenly, a portal opens in the middle of the room, and out steps Rick's late wife, Diane. Everyone is stunned, especially Beth, who sees her mother. Rick and Morty immediately question whether this is real. Rick suggests Diane might just be a manifestation created by the fear hole. They wonder why they're still trapped inside the illusion. Rick theorizes that Morty's greatest fear is that Rick will choose Diane over him, meaning their adventures would end. Despite this, Rick and Morty decide to spend time with Diane, though things between Rick and Diane are complicated. Morty proposes an alternative theory. Rick's deepest fear is getting a second chance with Diane and failing to seize it. Rick sticks to his original idea and tells Morty he must confront his fear to escape the hole. While Rick pursues Diane, Morty returns to the Dennis restaurant searching for answers. There, he meets the mysterious man again, who warns him that Rick will eventually face death and Morty will follow. Meanwhile, Rick notices that Morty is struggling to overcome his fears and decides to help him. Together, they manage to escape the fear hole, but the ordeal isn't over. The hole pulls them back, trapping them in an endless loop out of the hole and back in again. Eventually, Morty realizes his ultimate fear is that Rick might find another Morty. He wakes up and discovers that Rick never actually jumped in after him. Morty had faced his fear alone the whole time. When Rick hears about Diane appearing in the fear hole, he is tempted to join, but ultimately resists. Instead, he leaves a photo of Morty from his wallet in the Dennis restroom as a token of Morty's victory over the fear hole. The next day, Rick and Morty are scavenging through the ruins of the destroyed Citadel. The landscape is bleak and abandoned. Suddenly, their ship is hit by falling debris, forcing them to make an emergency landing on a nearby asteroid. There, they discover an entire city populated by Mortys. The question arises, why are there so many Mortys here if they were all supposedly sent home? The answer is simple. These are not the originals, but clones created by Ricks. Rick and Morty land on a small farm, where the owner is a grumpy Rick dressed like a stereotypical farmer. He begrudgingly drives them off, and we get a glimpse of his daily routine, feeding bizarre mutated pigs, harvesting crops, and enduring quiet solitude. Later, it's revealed that this farmer Rick was once the head of the cloning division at the Citadel. When the farmer Rick heads into the Morty city to gather supplies, he encounters Arcade Morty, one of the local Mortys. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted by an attack. A group of armed Ricks kidnaps several Mortys. The farmer Rick is grazed by bullets as the kidnappers retreat to the Citadel ruins, attempting to use the Mortys for cloning experiments, but failing. The gang's leader, nicknamed Hot Rick, receives payment from Southern Rick, a vial of portal fluid, which has now become a form of local currency. Meanwhile, Farmer Rick recovers with the help of his robots and returns home, only to find his massive farm burned to the ground and his mutated pigs gone. Enraged, he sets out for the Citadel, determined to get revenge. Along the way, Arcade Morty and his partner reveal themselves, having stowed away on Farmer Rick's ship. Arcade Morty explains his mission, to free all the kidnapped Mortys. Driven by vengeance but agreeing to help, Farmer Rick teams up with them. They fight through the Citadel's defenses, taking down Ricks one by one until they reach the cloning chamber. There, Southern Rick, the leader of the surviving Ricks, offers Farmer Rick a chance to return to his old position and reintegrate into the system. Farmer Rick appears to cooperate, but instead of creating a normal Morty, he produces a super-strong mutated Morty who quickly goes out of control, wreaking havoc. Farmer Rick manages to free all the Mortys and helps them escape, staying behind on the asteroid to confront the Ricks in the Citadel. At first, he holds his own, but he soon suffers heavy damage. Southern Rick confronts Farmer Rick with a dramatic speech, only for it to be revealed that Southern Rick is actually just a clone created by Farmer Rick himself. In a final act of sacrifice, Farmer Rick destroys the Citadel, obliterating what remains of the old Rick-dominated world. The surviving Mortys decide to stop hiding and live freely. Arcade Morty buries Farmer Rick. Shortly afterward, the original Rick and Morty return, because Morty had lost his spinner. Instead of encountering Farmer Rick, they run into Arcade Morty. Seeing Farmer Rick's grave, our Rick assumes Arcade Morty killed him. Arcade Morty tries to convince them otherwise, but Rick and Morty ignore him and head back home. Rick is lying on the bed with one of his lovers, Beetle Anna. She invites him to a family barbecue, but Rick declines. At this moment, an important revelation comes to light. Beetlana knows about Diane, Rick's late wife, whom he still loves. Rick admits that he barely remembers Diane because the Omega device, created by Rick Prime, deliberately left him with only a single memory of her passing. All other memories of Diane were erased. Back at home, Rick notices Jerry, whose brain still holds fragments of Rick's memories from when their consciousnesses were once merged. To fix this, Rick extracts Memory Rick from Jerry's mind and stores him in a special prison inside his supercomputer. The Smith family realizes that Rick has the ability to erase any memory from anyone's mind. Later, Rick decides to remove the memory of his wife Diane from his own mind. He dives deep into his consciousness and finds a memory Diane shooting at the range. The origin of this memory remains unclear, since the Omega device erased all other recollections of Diane, but it may be explained in the next season. Rick C-137 watches the memory with quiet longing, then makes a decision he had never dared before. He finally erases Diane from his mind. A portal appears, extracting Rick's memory of Diane and transferring it to a separate storage device. Afterward, Rick, now free and happy without the memories of Diane, calls Beetlana, accepts her invitation to the barbecue, and heads off to take a shower. Later, Beth enters Rick's garage and powers up his supercomputer. Young Rick from the memories activates one of his inventions and enters Beth's consciousness. Rick announces to the family that he has permanently erased Diane, leaving everyone stunned, especially Beth. For the first time in a long while, Rick appears calm. At the barbecue with Beetlana, Rick is unusually frank, openly declaring his relationship to her family. In their culture, this is seen as shameful, so Rick is forced to defend their honor in an arena. He defeats his challenger and then returns to his garage. The story shifts to the memories of Beth C-131, where we see young Rick leaving little Beth. Remember, Rick walked away from Beth C-131's family when she was a child. At this moment, Memory Rick from Jerry's mind appears, telling young Beth he has returned for good. Young Rick claims that Diane is trapped in the basement in a box and that Beth must put it on her head to save her. He begins training his daughter rigorously. These memories drive adult Beth to descend into Rick's basement to rescue her mother. She dons Rick's memory helmet, and Rick, along with Diane from Memory Rick, is reunited with her. While it's just a projection, it becomes clear that Rick genuinely loves her deeply. Together, they traverse into Beth's consciousness. Suddenly, Space Beth appears and senses that Earth Beth is hiding something. A fight breaks out between them. Space Beth is surprised by Earth Beth's combat skills, and ultimately, Earth Beth prevails, defeating her. Later, Rick revives Space Beth. Earth Beth realizes that Diane and Rick inside her mind are merely memories, which awakens the other versions of Beth stored in memory. All versions of Beth come together to confront the imposter Rick. Diane and Rick travel through a chain of memories. In the present, Earth Beth begins to lose control and steers a vehicle straight toward a cliff. Rick and Space Beth rush to save her. Space Beth then confronts Earth Beth in another fight. After several tense minutes, Earth Beth raises a gun, overwhelmed by the voices in her head. At that moment, the memories of Diane and Rick from Memory Rick take hold of the other Beth versions within her mind, forcing Memory Rick to confront the impact of his actions on his daughter. Earth Beth tells Space Beth that she remembers simultaneously loving and resenting her father. Rick C-137 arrives, embraces his daughter, comforts her, and then powers down. Rick then extracts the memories of Memory Rick from Jerry's mind and the memory of Diane from his own mind out of Beth's head. During dinner, he informs the family that both Memory Rick and Memory Diane are now gone forever. The family mourns, believing Rick has destroyed them, and he departs on his own business. Rick takes off in his space cruiser, traveling 100 light-years away from Earth. It becomes clear that he hasn't destroyed Diane or young Rick. He has placed them into a special device, effectively creating a mini-planet for them. With a tinge of sadness in his voice, Rick bids Diane farewell, sending the memories of his lost eternal love into space, along with young Rick.